We won't take up too much of your time, but we thought it'd be useful just to hear from a few people who have kind of done successful applications recently and to hear about their experiences, good points and bad points, as a kind of framing for the task that we're then asking you to do. And this day is very much about you rather than about us, but we felt it would be useful to do this anyway. So my name is Colin Sterling, and I have a long title at the moment. I don't know if others feel this, but in academia it seems to me your title grows and grows until you get the job you want, right? And then the title gets really short again. But at the moment I'm Postdoctoral Research Associate and AHRC Leadership Fellow at the UCL Institute of Archaeology. I thought it would be very useful. You know, positionality is always important in these kind of research projects, so I thought I'd just say a little bit about my career path. So I did a BA in Ancient History and Archaeology in Manchester back in 2003-2006. I actually went to university to do accounting and finance, but that's a very different story. I then did an MA at UCL in Cultural Heritage Studies, and my work on both of those crossed a lot of different areas, so Romanticism, photography, museums, memory, basically anything that was interesting to me. You will see that that is a continuing thing in my work. And then I got a job with a consultancy, a heritage consultancy called Barker Langham, and that really expanded my notion of what heritage was and what I could do in this field. And I was involved in oral history projects, audience research, cultural planning, grant writing across a whole range of national and international projects, which was incredibly useful. And then I, kind of alongside that, but afterwards, I did a PhD about heritage and photography, looking internationally at case studies in Cyprus and Cambodia. That's my research question, super broad, way too broad. I became completely obsessed with what the word shape meant. I think that's a common thing, right, with PhD students. You just get locked into one word and just think, oh, that must mean something. That must mean something that no one else has thought about. And then after that, I went to be a project curator at the Royal Institute of British Architects and continued as a kind of research associate freelance consultancy with Barker Langham, again doing lots of stuff around collections management, grant writing, curating, and exhibitions and interpretation. So that looks very neat and tidy and linear. In fact, this would be a more accurate line because I just feel like it's been all over the place over the past 10 years. But it has brought me to where I currently am, which is two different projects at the moment. So, Rodney's already spoken about the AHRC Heritage Priority Area, so I don't need to go into that too much. But my specific theme of research at the moment within that is around nature, culture, and the post-humanities. And I can explain those terms, or the post-humanities terms, if they like. But the kind of general research question that Rodney and I are looking at is what are the implications of the Anthropocene and the post-humanities more broadly for heritage research and practice, and what might it mean to think with heritage in more than human worlds. And we're co-authoring a book and have an edited volume about these issues coming out. The other project, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more detail about, which is my leadership fellowship, has this title, New Trajectories in Curatorial Experience Design, which is one of those, you know, awful, horrendous titles that these things sometimes get. But it captures what I was interested in at the time in a very nice way. It's a 2-year project running from Feb 2019 to Jan 2021. So I'm technically about 4 months in, although because I'm 50% on both, I'm actually like 2 months in. It gets very complicated. I'm sure lots of you are aware when you're working on multiple projects at once. And the core research question is, how can curators and other heritage professionals best engage with innovative methods of experience or experiential design to create new models of audience engagement, including truly collaborative forms of co-curation around experience design? It's too long-winded. I hate using it. I never say that to people when I actually meet them and talk about the project, but that's the core research question that was in the grant proposal that got the funding. So it's useful to kind of go back to that. The context for this research was really just observing a whole load of new, weird, different things in the exhibitions and interpretive world and curating over the past few years. So, you know, the massive appeal of secret cinema as this immersive experience and punch drunk at different museums. The National Trust were starting to do these little kind of installations in strange locations around London, where in this case they recreated a club that was shut down in the 1930s for homosexual behaviour. VR, has anyone been to Marshmallow Laser Feast at the Saatchi Gallery? Absolutely incredible. Best thing I've ever done in 15 minutes of my time. And then this inspired me a lot. When I was working at RIBA, we did this thing around the Brutalist Playground, where we hired some architects to actually recreate a playground from the 1960s in foam that then kids could come in and play with. It was absolutely brilliant, and it's why I wanted to go and work at RIBA, and then I subsequently discovered that was very atypical of what they do. I won't say more about that. So the other research context that I think is really useful for my funding is around the broader funding landscape. So as people come across the broader kind of creative economy program that AHRC have been running and are still running over the past few years. So this was a massive, massive pot of money that went out. When was this launched? Do you know? 2016, 17, something like that. And it was so it's tying into this idea that the creative economy is worth £84 billion in the UK. And in response to that, they created these 8 new research and development partnerships, creative clusters, giving out £80 million of funding to those clusters, looking across the creative industries and the university sector. And I got really interested in this when I was working for RIBA and Barker Langham, and I was trying to develop one of these very, very large projects, going for like 8 to 10 million, and trying to use some of my connections to develop something around experiential design, around exhibitions, but it just couldn't get traction. I just couldn't do it. And so what I realised was, well, I'm going to keep that idea, because that's quite a good idea, and I'm going to use that as some future point for a much smaller grant that I think I can actually develop myself, because it just became very obvious that I was not in the right position to do that for one of these big ones. There's also a lot of funding around at the moment around immersive experiences, tying into the immersive economy, as it's now called, all of these different buzzwords that are very much part of the UK's economic plans for the future. There's also Audience of the Future, which I think is another £2 million pot of money. So this is just very, very current in thinking. And so my research kind of tied into this broader funding strategic priorities that the AHRC had. The specific funding stream that I'm in is a highlight notice in the AHRC Leadership Fellowship Scheme, Early Career Route, RC UK UKRI Innovation Fellowship. So I don't know whether I'm actually a Leadership Fellow or an Innovation Fellow. I'm still not sure, but I find the word innovation even more problematic than the word leadership. So I have chosen to go with leadership. And the idea was that these were, and then this is the subcategory within that, Creative and Digital Economy Innovation Leadership Fellows for Early Career Researchers, wishing to undertake an innovative research fellowship, blah, blah, blah. What was very important about this, though, so 2 things. One, it was tied very, very directly to the UK industrial strategy. So I actually had to read this 100-page document, the UK industrial strategy, to think about this, how my strange little research project would tie into that, which is something I never thought I would have to do, and it's like 4 hours of my life I'll never get back. But it was actually a useful way of framing it, thinking, okay, immediately I'm engaging with the impact and I'm engaging with what this means to the broader sector, not just what this means to me as an individual researcher that I'm interested in this thing. And then the other key point is that because it was a highlight notice, some of the eligibility criteria were waived. So I did not have to be employed prior to 1 year to the submission, and I did not have to have any kind of contract beyond the duration of the fellowship. So because of this highlight notice, it meant that I could go for something which I otherwise would not have been able to go for. So it's really worth just digging deep into those documents and those calls that go out to see, oh, actually, this applies to me in ways that I hadn't anticipated. I'm just going to talk very quickly about some of the things that you're then going to be asked to do. So, project planning. This was not the Gantt chart that I submitted with my proposal, because you don't have enough space, really, in the amount of forms, in the amount of pages that you have to do a proper Gantt chart. This is the one that I created just after I'd started it. Look at that, it even has the date there. That's project management, that is. So it just runs through like, what are my project management tasks? I doubt you can actually read this on here because it's kind of a bit blurry. What are my research activities and how do I break these down by phases? What are my leadership activities and how have I broken these down? And then what are the outputs and kind of deliverables and milestones, and how do these relate to each stage? I probably should have done more complicated colour coding there, but it gets across the general idea. So I think that's one of the things we're going to be asking people to do now, right? Project partners were very, very important to the project from the outset. It's why I wanted to do it. I didn't want to do it as an individual researcher. I wanted to work with cool, interesting people that I'd met along the way and to think about how I might help them and how they might help me. So the 5 research project partners that are part of the proposal are VARI, VA Research Institute, the National Trust, my old company Barker Langham, Met Design Studio, who are an exhibition design firm who specifically call themselves experiential designers. And they work all around the world doing this kind of thing. And then Nis and Richards, who are a bit smaller scale, but cross the theatre and exhibition design and a very interesting kind of performance and that kind of thing. So I was very happy with this set of project partners. It took a long time for me to get them all on board and to actually get the letters of support written. I basically had to write the letters of support myself, slightly edit them so they seem different, and then get them just to sign them off. Because obviously, the heads of commercial companies and the heads of the National Trust always, they do not have time to engage with you for your small little leadership project, so you have to put the work in. But it did come back as one of the key things from the peer reviewers. So all of them were like, this is one of the strengths of this proposal. The project partners are perfect. The researcher seems to know them. If he doesn't know them, then they're willing to work with him. And it was a really strong aspect of it. In terms of methods, which is another thing we're going to look at now, right? So, I mean, it's just quite general methods, really. This kind of stuff that I'm sure we're all familiar with. A bit of interviews and desk-based research as an initial phase, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. What I called embedded research with practitioners, so actually following along a project as it starts to develop and as it progresses. So I'm hoping to work with Met on one of their ongoing projects at the moment around that. I'm going to lots of events and weird stuff. So I've got tickets to the War of the Worlds immersive experience, which I otherwise would never be able to afford to go to. All of this weird VR stuff that I wouldn't go to. There's an immersive experience that's where you like pretend you're in the SAS for a week. But I think I'd die doing that, so I'm not going to do that one. And then the fun bit at the end, which is happening next year, is action research and actually developing my own immersive experience as part of that at the end of the project, using some of the learning from the first year, applying it in the second year, working with the partners as a kind of advisory board, and then doing a really fun, weird thing. In terms of outputs, I thought I would map these against the methods. I've been really aware of kind of using stuff in a strategic and in a way that you don't have to keep repeating the same work, and stuff can just kind of feed through from methods to outputs to different things, right? So for exhibition visits, I'll just kind of do a blog post and stuff. Interviews, I want to actually create podcasts from those, so they're not just research interviews, they're actually outputs in and of themselves. Embedded research becomes a sector-facing toolkit, where I'm actually reporting back to practitioners in different museums and organisations. Desk-based research becomes 2 academic papers, and then action research becomes this newly created experience. So there's kind of like this obvious flow to the project and the outputs and the methods. And then the idea is that all of this then gets collated into a nice edited book. And I'm very keen not to work with a kind of commercial academic publisher. I want to do something that actually looks nice, that the sector will read and professionals will read. I don't want academics to really even look at this book. So that all sounds great, right? It's worth saying that I did 4 other applications before this, all of which were completely unsuccessful. In the last year of my PhD, I worked with astrophysicists, anthropologists and artists to develop a Leverhulme research grant on the theme of dark matter and cosmic transmission, which was brilliant and never got funding, and I just think the biggest lost opportunity to British funding in 10 years, because that was an amazing project. I went for a fellowship with this little kind of body, the Institute of Advanced Studies, didn't get anywhere with that. I went for a fellowship with ArcDes, which is a museum in Stockholm, a kind of short fellowship, didn't get that. And then put in the Leafingholm Early Career Fellowship application, didn't get anywhere with that. Oh yeah, so I was also going to say, I wasn't kind of creating new projects here. All of these were responding to an ongoing interest I have around future archaeologies and speculative archaeologies, which I can talk about a bit. I'm also going to be kind of cheating here a little bit, because obviously I only have a temporary contract and I am developing my own large grant application, and so I'm going to be both facilitating and using this as an opportunity to think about my future application. And this is just a kind of little hint as to what it is. I've become really obsessed with carbon dioxide removal and carbon capture and storage and how it relates to heritage. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about as a future project. Okay, a few takeaways. I don't know how insightful these insights are, but they were useful to me just as I was going through this. So think about the research context beyond just the intellectual background. I think we can all become really too kind of immersed in the intellectual stuff. Look at the strategy documents, look at the social and economic factors and the wider funding priorities. That was essential for mine. Have elastic ideas. So my project was initially this huge 10 million pound thing. I've scaled it down to a £250,000 2-year thing, but it's fundamentally the same research questions. And you know, just think about them as stretchy concepts that you might scale up or down. Think creatively about project partners. So build on your established networks, but also put in this time to develop new collaborations and strategic partnerships. I think that was very important for my project. And then don't think of impact as some kind of add-on. Consider how the questions, methods, outputs are kind of fully integrated from the outset. So the thing that comes at the end, you're thinking about from the very start. And yeah, it's not this kind of, oh yeah, now I have to do an exhibition or something about this. And then this is very currently my mind. Be ambitious, but don't overcommit. I've totally failed at that. So that's more like a lesson learned rather than a particular insight.